The actual chapter and the section 32 documents were posted out to you, as were the maps and the other chapters that we've been talking about today. On the sides of the room here, you'll see boxes of enormous enormous files. Those are the 6,000 odd pages that also make up the section 32. They're the assessments of all of the schedule activities and the items in the schedules for natural and cultural heritage. Because of the cost of all of the printing, we have simply made 3 of those copies, and we'll leave it here for you to peruse at any time, or if you want to see it outside of chambers, you're welcome to come and see me, or I can leave a set up in the councillors' chambers. They are, of course, confidential at this stage, and they are available online. Sorry, they're not confidential, they're available online.
Right. Yep. Far away.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's Caroline Racklin. So I'm going to present to you on the Natural and Cultural Heritage chapter together with Andrew Long and various other staff experts in the various topics, and I'll get them to come up to the table at each specific topic area. So just briefly to talk through, you've received that package of information which includes the chapter section 32, and also just really wanted to bring to your attention before we start the proposed schedule of all the proposed listed items. So it's a very important component of the chapter, as well as the planning maps and the aerial maps for heritage, which show the extent of the heritage items and settings proposed. So the chapter covers broadly those 5 topic areas of landscapes, historic heritage, areas of natural character in the coastal environment, ecosystems and biodiversity, and trees. So I'll just talk you through the context and process just briefly. So for this chapter, there should be some bullet points up there, but they've come off for some reason. These are important places and features within the district to protect, and they're informed, for instance, significant trees, heritage buildings, and sites of ecological significance. Now, there's been much technical assessment work to underpin why each of these places are significant and proposed for listing, and that's contained in the Section 32 documentation. They're places that are special and important to the district for economic, cultural, natural environment reasons and they cover a broad range of geographical areas across the district. Then overlay the different zones. So an important thing to point out to you as we've developed the scope of this chapter, and I think I've mentioned this before on a previous occasion, that the provisions have been drafted considering the ability to use non-regulatory and regulatory methods, and what has been proposed through the district plan really draws on the fact that we have advice, assistance, for instance grants available for heritage buildings, planning officers and experts available to provide advice. So we rely on rules but also on the methods outside of the plan. So the first topic area to run through, and just to point out the key points and the key points of difference to the existing plan, is around the landscapes and features and natural character in the coastal environment. So I might see if Hannah Luthwaite could join us. Hannah's our senior landscape planner.
We've done a lot of this in the context of which chapter?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9.
Yes, so Chapter 9, I've spoken to you about Chapter 9 before.
Yeah.
So hopefully a lot of this is a recap or building on what you've already heard before. So, and some of this, a lot of it comes up in Chapter 13 as well.
Central City.
Central City.
So, just excuse me for being just slightly dumb at the moment. So, what did we do before what didn't we do before that we're doing now? You know, so what's the difference between what went before and what's now?
Okay, so it's been a previous briefing.
Yeah.
And so this really does recap on that. And no. Okay, so nothing's been notified as such.
Originally, this was going to come forward in stage 2, you might recall, and for various reasons, and also the need to have more time to do some of the assessments, it was delayed until stage 3, which is why you've already had one briefing on it.
Right.
And if you'd like
It's just
us
that it
to-
looked very familiar.
It
and
is. It
okay.
is familiar. You have had a briefing on it, and then it got delayed to stage 3.
Okay, but we asked and answered a number of questions in that context.
That's correct.
Okay, so this may not take as long
No.
as the extent of the documentation might indicate.
That's
okay,
correct.
right, carry on.
Okay, so just broadly in this topic area, there's 3 main areas of outstanding natural features and landscapes and significant features and landscapes, areas of natural character in the coast, and a policy framework for the identification of future significant landscapes. So highlighted there is that there are new outstanding natural features proposed, particularly in the Christchurch area. There's a couple of examples noted. The outstanding status is being determined through landscape expert work, which Hannah can expand on if you need that. Some of the extent of the ONFLs have been amended. That's predominantly on the Banks Peninsula.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of discussion around that, wasn't there? Yeah, yeah.
And there's some new significant features and landscapes, and that's mainly in the Christchurch area, but also on parts of the Port Hills. So that's all provided in the documentation you have and on the planning maps.
Yep.
You might want to explain why some blue, some is blue, some is black in the chapter.
Sure. So in the chapter that you have with you,
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9, now it doesn't apply to the landscape section, but it does apply to the, in case you're wondering why some of the text is shown in blue. Now that
Yes.
applies to the Indigenous Biodiversity section 9.1 and the Historic Heritage section 9.3. Because of section 86 in the RMA, because of that, some of these rules will have immediate legal effect at time of notification. So that's to highlight that particular point.
So that's just a matter of process under the RMA, that as soon as we notify, that takes effect,
Yes.
but that could be overturned afterwards, or?
Yes, well, yes, because it still has to go through the proper submissions process.
But it's the idea that you don't sort of rush in and chop down a whole lot of trees or destroy the outstanding natural landscape. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Got that?
The next topic area is areas of natural character in the coast. So there has been landscape studies done to determine which parts are outstanding and at least high natural character. And that's it's builds to an extent on the operative plan, and that's really derived primarily from requirements of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. And there's a rule framework and policy framework for all of these areas to identify and manage them. So I've just put a brief snapshot on this next slide about generally for these topic areas. They're identified on the planning maps, they're listed in the schedules, informed by landscape assessment work. There's a policy framework for the 3 topic areas, and something particular to note is that the qualities of each of these places is identified in the policies of the chapter for the landscape section. So you'll see that, for instance, Riccarton Bush, for instance, the Port Hills sets out why they're important. So there are rules to manage a range of types of development across these areas, ranging from some with permitted standards through to discretionary non-compliant, for instance, and some reliance on rules of the zone-based chapters. Would you like me to move on to historic heritage?
Yep.
Oh, before I do that, this is an example of Hannah, would you like to explain that map probably?
Certainly, Caroline, and I think some of you might have seen this before.
Yeah, I think we have.
But I'm happy to go over it because I think the key points are that you can see the landscape overlays, which are in the purple, which is the outstanding, the light blue, which is high coastal character, natural character, and the magenta colour, which is the outstanding coastal natural character. Now, those are overlays over the existing and underlying rural zone. So what Caroline was referring to is where those overlays for landscape or coastal natural character reasons have been identified. They rely on rules in the underlying zone primarily, but introduce a strong objective and policy direction listing the qualities of why those overlays are there, what it means at the time of development or land use. It's essentially the system that's being used, so it's making sure the important qualities are identified, have appropriate direction, and at the same time don't duplicate on any rules.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the next topic is historic heritage. So I might just do a swap to see if Amanda Oates could come up.
Yep.
In relation to just what you went over, it's on page 13, and it's with the outstanding feature, natural feature of Brooklands lagoons. But so it's just simply that the description in 1 is that the landform of the spit in the lagoon are like the distinctive feature, and I'm just wondering, is there any reason that the dunes themselves as a barrier are not also part of that distinctive feature? Sorry, this is on, it's on chapter 9, page
13,
yeah.
9.2.2.5, policy outstanding natural feature, Brooklands Lagoon and spit.
I might get Hannah to. Yeah.
So to clarify what you're asking, the outstanding natural feature covers the whole of the area that's in council's jurisdiction, from the mean high water springs back through to the rural land, and you can see that on the inline maps in the schedule to chapter 13. Are you asking about within that outstanding area, or the area to the south where the dunes are identified as a significant feature?
I'm really asking about the dunes themselves being included.
Okay, so within the Brooklands outstanding natural feature, it does include dune systems, wetland, mudflat areas, and then to the south there's an area of dunes along the coast that have been identified as a significant feature.
Right.
So I'm not aware that any dunes
No,
have
that's fine.
not been
It's
included.
perhaps just how it was worded that I.
It does
just wanna
talk
make sure
about
that
the
it was part of-
landform behind the
It says
dunes.
it's formed behind the dunes barrier,
Yeah.
and I just sort of inferred that it was possible that in fact it didn't include the dunes, whereas you're saying, look, in fact on the maps it does.
It does, because
the main
it's the maps that have the
Yes.
overlay.
And you should have the planning maps with you now, still from this
Yep, we've got
morning.
them.
Yeah.
All right, no, good question.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, so the next topic is historic heritage. So we've been through this before, but I'll run through these key points. So there's a policy framework proposed to work with Ngāi Tahu to identify sites of cultural significance, and also a policy proposed for cultural landscapes. So that's for a future work programme. One of the key principles in relation to heritage items, being buildings, bridges and the like, is enabling their ongoing and adaptive use so they can be continued to used in the future. And the heritage items, as I was mentioned earlier under chapter 13, section 12, is they've been structured around a 2-group classification: group 1 high significance, group 2 significant. That is in contrast notably to the city plan, which is a 4-group classification. The provisions have been based around heritage conservation management and heritage principles, and there is a policy to that effect in that section of the chapter. There's a total of 490 proposed heritage items to be listed. Now that number doesn't include those in the central city, that can be covered separately if need be, and Amanda's able to speak to the detail on the numbers proposed to be deleted or amended, for instance. I've just given you a snapshot there. And the other point to note in the documentation that's available is the heritage aerial maps, which show the extent of the item and the item setting to be protected. And similar to the landscape studies, this work has been informed by heritage assessment work. So each and every heritage place has its own. It's about a 5 or 6 page statement of significance. So there's a lot of work gone into developing these statements and the schedules. So in terms of the rules, there's rules for items and settings, and that's quite different to the existing plan, in which the rules relied on development on the site of a heritage building. It's different in respect of the use of the word setting, but it's quite similar in approach in that, for instance, new buildings on the site of a heritage building, which would now be new buildings on a setting, would still require consent. The provisions are very enabling around repairs and maintenance for heritage buildings, and that's actually permitted with a number of standards. There's a non-compliant status for demolition of heritage items for Group 1 and Group 2 items, and a controlled activity status for heritage upgrade work, so that's around seismic strengthening, putting in provision for fire and access. and silent file areas is they have been rolled over from the operative Banks Peninsula District Plan. So they're shown on the planning maps also, and there's rules in place for them. And that's about the sites of cultural significance to Ngāi Tahu that are encompassed on a broader geographic area but are not specifically detailed in the plan. So that, I think we've discussed before, that effectively acts as a trigger to have that consultation and consent process. And similar to the process policy for landscapes and heritage areas, there's a future work program for heritage areas with the policy framework established.
Yeah.
So that's all on the heritage
And
section.
these are all in blue as well, so these are immediately operative on notification.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, not immediately operative. They'd have immediate legal effect.
Immediate legal effect.
Yeah, so it's a technical matter, and then what that means is that the operative provisions still apply, but it's a weighting issue as to how much weight is given to the proposed provisions and the operative provisions.
Thank you.
Did you have any questions on that section, Molly?
No, I think we went through this in detail the last time, so it's all good. Trees, we had a long discussion about trees last time.
There is a topic on ecosystems and biodiversity before the trees topic.
Is there? It goes straight from heritage to significant trees in my
For some
chapter.
reason, one of the slides is missing.
Yeah.
Oh, but hang on, I'm not referring to the slide, I'm talking to the chapter.
Yes.
Chapter 3, Chapter 9 goes from 9.3, which is historic heritage, matters of control, to 9.4, significant trees.
Yeah, so I've structured the presentation slightly differently to do the
To the order of the chapter.
Yeah, it's partly
Okay.
a presentation matter, so Andrew could come and speak to the later two topics of biodiversity and trees.
That's a shame. It's not up on there.
So I assume that most of you are at the Indigenous biodiversity section in your chapter, so perhaps I'll start there.
Sorry, what page is that?
In the chapter section,
It's the one at the back.
it's at the
Page
back of
54 or something, is that? 51?
Oh, just before we get into that, I'll just introduce Liz Garson, who's our Principal Advisor for Natural Environment.
Sorry, mine ends at trees. Have I done something wrong? Have I printed,
At the start of the chapter.
eh?
Yeah, biodiversity.
Sorry,
right.
where's it?
It's actually on page 2. It's at the very start of the chapter, Indigenous biodiversity.
Well, that's why I couldn't find it. Right, thank you.
Okay, so
But you haven't got a slide on it.
Well,
We-
we did have.
It was.
but-
I had one copy here. But
Maybe it's at the beginning of your presentation. No?
No, I
I
don't
think
think
it's
so.
been a technical glitch because we prepared a slide on it, but yeah.
Okay.
I have a copy of it in front of me.
this slide is missing.
So I think we have talked about this
Okay, yeah.
before, so
You can flick
I'll
that
just
round to
run through
people.
what it actually
yeah,
does.
Okay.
The regional policy statement requires us to protect significant Indigenous vegetation, and we've done that through applying the criteria in the RPS to a range of sites across the district. There's 103 sites in total that we're proposing to protect, both in what was the city and what was Banks Peninsula. And Liz can talk more about what the criteria are and where some of those places are, but I think last time we talked about there being a range of things, so large areas of native bush to something that might be a habitat, like there's 3 pine trees somewhere that are a habitat, and the Avon River is a habitat. And the rules try to, manage activities within those areas. The rules also, and again this is something the RPS requires us to do, the rules protect other Indigenous vegetation, so that might be areas where we haven't surveyed yet, or where there might be a discovery of something living in a particular habitat that we're not yet aware of. So there are rules around protecting those areas. The rules do permit people to do some things, so there's a rule around doing some minor pruning to trees, and then removal of trees where there's a threat to public safety, that sort of thing. So that's a quick run through. Do you have anything? Where?
do you want to say anything about the numbers of them?
No, I said,
Oh.
That's significant trees, but there is a similar rule in Indigenous biodiversity where if it's a threat to public safety, say it's near a walking track or a road or something,
So a threat
it
to
might
public
might
safety.
land on somebody then. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
And I just bring to your attention again the maps and the planning maps and all the assessment reports on the side of the room here if you like to check on any particular address or any particular item.
Okay, moving ahead. Onto trees.
So we'll start on trees. Thank you, Liz. So with the work on trees is centred around really reviewing the lists of protected trees in the existing plan, so the city plan and the Banks plan. We've developed a much more robust and consistent method for doing that, and we're only protecting trees that are actually properly significant, and only those on private land will be listed. We are still protecting trees in the public realm through sort of more general provisions around sort of height and species, so that we ensure we keep those ones that we still do want, bearing in mind that some of those could still be significant.
Just to interrupt, this is page 50.
So I forget how many trees we did have listed, but now on private land we'll have 380, and there's 4 groups of trees as well. So we did have 1,180. Oh, hang on.
We're not listing that amount.
It doesn't matter. And again, there's rules around allowing people to do some minor pruning and felling where there are safety issues.
Just on the trees, is it possible to ask a question? Yep. So, I mean, I'm just really concerned at the huge number reduction in terms of what we have listed to 1150 down to 380 is quite significant.
So there's 2 aspects to that. One is that the existing lists contain a lot of trees that aren't necessarily significant. They might be good or average. Some of them aren't there anymore. So we're really only looking to protect those trees which are properly significant. That we're not protecting trees on, so we're not listing trees on public land. We're protecting them by another means.
Yeah. Okay, so how many trees are on public land, and why would you have the planning control for private rather than, like, I guess, public realm being council or government? Why would we have a different role for us?
Again, there's 2 reasons. One is that we didn't have time to survey all of those trees in the public realm, and the second reason is that we're probably protecting more trees this way, because it covers every tree in the public realm, where previously there were only some hundred that were listed as significant.
Phil?
I was just going to ask you about the pruning part. This is on page 52, especially where there's overhead wires, and there's reference there that unless it's detrimental to the health or structural integrity of the value of the tree. And so does that mean that in fact sort of, and I'm wondering at what point, because sometimes we do have some trees which are pretty misshapen because they've had to be pruned because of the overhead wiring. So does this cover that sufficiently? Because sometimes, like, quite frankly, you'd replant, in my layman's view.
Yeah, so there are outside the district plan provisions that allow electricity providers to do that pruning anyway, if it's interrupting people's supply. Yes, there will be instances where it's difficult to prune a tree and have it retain its shape. I think this is more about helping people, or guiding, or following up with people when they have cut it quite badly. We can go back and suggest that they do it in a slightly better way that's less likely to cause the trees some structural
I thought page
issues.
52 was all about felling a tree.
Is it council trees? Is it felling?
You can't fell unless the tree is dead or the tree is within tolerance zones for overhead electrical conductors.
Yeah.
Have I read that wrong?
No, you're correct. I'm sorry, I haven't read this for a while. I've been looking at evidence for subdivision.
Right.
So this is in the public realm, so these are council-owned trees anyway.
But so they can't be felled unless they meet these criteria. So this isn't about pruning, Phil. You're allowed to prune to keep trees safe and to keep the public safe.
I guess it's about removal, really.
Yeah.
when it's not, it isn't, it'll be, I'm assuming it's in a different
Yeah, but
part.
if it's within the tolerance zones for overhead electrical conductors and continued pruning is detrimental to the ongoing health or structural integrity or landscape value of the tree. So you have to go through a number of hoops to be able to fell it.
But it has to meet certain criteria.
Yeah.
Certain criteria have to be met before a consent can be granted for felling the tree on those grounds.
And it's difficult because trees are important, but so is electricity. Yeah.
Felling would be our last option.
Yeah, it's a but it's got to be provided for because in some instances it would be an absolute danger to actually leave it there.
And to require whoever to apply for resource consent to do that, presumably this council will be applying to itself and going through that process.
It's fair to say that some of the trees that are under the overhead wires now, with hindsight, you wouldn't replant because they weren't the most suitable. Well, with hindsight, they're certainly not as suitable now as they might have been.
Well, there's another side to that story. A while ago, council committed to underground all overhead wires in Christchurch, so the trees were let to grow through them on that understanding, and that undergrounding then got transferred to arterial or collector routes, and since the funding's been restricted, that's even dropped off slightly. So there's a lot of background as to why we have trees that are growing through wires.
It's interesting. Very good. Anything else? We're pruning the list, right? Coastal environment.
Yeah,